Hello, this is James D'Angelo, and welcome to the Bitcoin 101 Blackboard series. On July 5th, 2010, Satoshi Nakamoto, the anonymous inventor of Bitcoin, wrote, "Sorry to be a wet blanket, but writing a description of Bitcoin for general audiences is bloody hard. There's nothing to relate it to." And in truth, anyone who studies Bitcoin runs into the same problem, trying to explain Bitcoin to an absolute beginner so they reach some sort of epiphany. And there's no question that I've struggled with the same problem. And it wasn't until I got a call a couple weeks ago from Harvard to do a talk about what is Bitcoin that I really had to stare this problem in its face. And so I came up with these slides and I came up with this talk that I'm going to try and do right now. So this is going to be a story. It's a parable, and it's called How the Constraints of Digital Define Bitcoin. And it's a parable because we don't know all the facts. Satoshi Nakamoto, as we'll talk about, is anonymous, so we don't know exactly what he was thinking when he was designing Bitcoin. But fortunately, he's written enough, and we'll use some of his quotes in the story, that we get an idea of the processes he was going through. So let's move forward. In 2008, our story begins. And it wasn't just coincidence that Bitcoin as an idea was born in 2008 amid the turmoil of the financial crisis. And in these years, it was pretty easy to notice that the average person was more concerned about the idea of money than normal. And Bitcoin addressed similar ideas. So as people were talking about the Fed a lot in those years, there were a lot of discussions about money creation, monetary control, and quantitative easing. And of course, there were those who thought the bailouts were acceptable and the Fed was acting appropriately with the stimulus package and all that. And there were those who didn't. And so a lot of chaos, mistrust, and anger ensued. And it was directed at these big financial institutions, banks, insurance companies like AIG or the Fed, all these organizations that wielded enormous financial powers. But our story doesn't deal with those two groups. It deals with a much smaller group of programmers, individuals who thought that software was the way to address the problems they perceived with money. And our story focuses on one person in particular. And that person is Satoshi Nakamoto, who, as we mentioned, is anonymous, but he uses a male Japanese pseudonym. So we'll just honor his request and call him a he. Could be a female, could be a group of people, could be Martians. We don't know who they are, but we do have some of the writings. So whoever did this was posting and blogging and updating Bitcoin. They wrote a white paper and they signed it with Satoshi Nakamoto. And in some of those writings from their account, they wrote this: "The central bank must be trusted not to debase the currency, but the history of fiat currencies is full of breaches of this trust. Banks must be trusted to hold our money and transfer it electronically, but they lend it out in waves of credit bubbles with barely a fraction in reserve." And he wrote that in February of 2009, just a month after launching Bitcoin. But what becomes evident from this is that he's an excellent writer, he's got an intimate idea of the history of finance and cryptography, and he believes that inside software there's a solution to the financial crisis. And his particular solution is devilishly simple. He wants to turn ones and zeros into money. Okay, and this isn't like your credit card or online banking where those ones and zeros or those numbers represent money held by the bank or some other institution. This is actually turning ones and zeros into money, such that if you hold those ones and zeros, or you hold that long string of numbers, you are actually holding that money. And this had never been done before. But what's important to realize is that this dream was not new. So 20 to 30 years ago, IBM and others were very involved with trying to develop digital currencies. Milton Friedman, the Nobel laureate in economics, also was in a big televised interview where he was talking about the powers that would be possible if you could create a digital currency. And he talked about softening borders and possibly even eroding the nation state. And still there were others. So people had written New York Times bestsellers that focused on digital currencies and the provocative changes it might bring to our society. But the most famous group when it comes to the development of digital currencies is the cypherpunks. Okay, so they're not the cyberpunks. And this was a group that started in San Francisco, guys that were just meeting up, that eventually became one of the first mailing lists in history. So in the early 90s, it was a collection of really powerful programmers from Apple, Microsoft, the government, all getting together, some of them anonymous, some of them using their real names, talking about using cryptography to change the way the world works. So they believed that inside the digital domain, inside cryptography, they could sidestep the problems of money created by politics, banks, and special interests. And they had been thinking about this since the 80s. And this is from their own manifesto. It reads, Cypherpunks advocate the widespread use of cryptography as a route to social and political change. And one of their main focuses was digital currencies. And so it's important to realize that there's enormous advantages of taking your currency and turning it into something that is digital. And most of these are fairly obvious, right? Now you can send your currency very fast. And so the velocity of money increases to a maximum. The currency itself weighs nothing, so storage and transport is minimal. It is programmable. So depending on how complex the programming algorithm is in the digital currency, it can actually make decisions based on external factors. It's very internet ready, right? Current cash is not very good with the internet. It's international, obviously. It provides easy accounting because it's already digital and already typed in. It's cheap to issue. Governments spend billions of dollars printing and minting and protecting a currency, and they also spend billions of dollars fighting counterfeits, okay? And then there's, of course, probably other things that I didn't think of right here. But there was a big problem. So going digital, turning money into digital, was proving really elusive to all these genius cypherpunks. They were having a hard time going digital. And it's important to understand the very qualities of digital that were making this difficult. And the biggest problem was that digital is great at recording things, and then once you've recorded it, it is even better at making perfect copies. So you can make perfect copies of music, perfect copies of videotapes, photos, and data, and you can make perfect copies of messages, so transactions, digital tokens, etc. And this is really important because the first idea that almost anyone would have if they're going to try and create a digital currency is that they're going to try to make some form of digital token. Something that can't be copied, that I can pass around and I can prove uniqueness. Well, that is really difficult in the digital domain. Anything that IBM and these others were trying to develop to make these digital tokens was quickly being copied by hackers. So this perfect ability to copy was thwarting digital currencies. And this is pretty clear. Perfect copies make bad money. So if counterfeits are indistinguishable from the real McCoy, you don't have a monetary system. If you can run off US dollars from a Xerox copier, then you don't have financial institutions at all. And here's a little poster, the US government spending money trying to alert the public to the problems of counterfeit money. And so as the ideas improved, as they got farther away from digital tokens, they ran into still another problem. And this problem might even be more famous. It's called the double spending problem. And the double spending problem has to do with the fact that networks are noisy. And so any transactions of your digital currency that you're going to spit out across the network are not going to arrive as soon as you send it. There's going to be a delay time between sending it and when it arrives. And this could be 1 second or up to even minutes, but it's usually around 15 seconds. But what can happen is that in this time, a clever hacker, whatever, can resend the same transaction using the same value to numerous other people. And so this idea of double spending really could have been called the infinite spending problem. And as more and more experts started to think about the difficulty of creating these digital tokens or this infinite spending problem, they started to think that creating digital currencies might just be impossible. And so all this excitement towards creating digital currencies started to die off. But in 2008, with the financial crisis and all these concerns about money, new fires were being rekindled in the imagination of some of these programmers. And Satoshi Nakamoto, working in 2008, was one of them. And again, he was inflamed and frustrated by the current monetary system, and he was having real difficulties with the double spending problem in these digital tokens, and he started to look elsewhere for inspiration. And so he studied this new software that had come out in 2001 called BitTorrent, which by some estimates in 2008, when Satoshi was working, was responsible for approximately 50% of all internet traffic. And there's some estimates that say that BitTorrent was responsible for up to 80% of all internet traffic. And BitTorrent was famous partly because it replaced this even more famous company called Napster. And if you say Napster to a programmer, it's as famous as if you're saying the Trojan horse. Launched in 1999, shut down in 2001, Napster's failure became an important case study for hackers and a turning point in the design of modern software systems. And this is because when someone mentions Napster to a programmer, they immediately think centralized. And they think centralized in the worst of all ways. Centralized meaning bad, and centralized meaning not robust. And so for those who are not familiar with Napster, they were a file sharing site where you could download copies of Michael Jackson's Billie Jean, or you could download Jurassic Park the film, but they kept all these files in one set of hard drives in one server in one place. And so they were ultimately centralized. And what happened is they probably got some sort of court injunction, but I like to picture it as the FBI went in, and when the FBI went in, they walked over to these hard drives in the server and they unplugged them, and Napster was done. With one plug, they had shut down the entire system. And so literally the same year that it was shut down, the code for BitTorrent was released, and it has been running ever since without being shut down. And its coup de grace, right, its solution to this centralized problem was to flip the problem of storage on its head. Instead of central servers, the BitTorrent algorithm chopped all the media files up into tiny pieces and scrambled them on users' computers everywhere. So Billie Jean and Jurassic Park were put all over the place, multiple copies everywhere. So when someone went to download it, they queried many computers that would bring it all together. Now it's important to realize that BitTorrent isn't even fully decentralized, but it is a much more decentralized system than Napster. And it is this seismic change in software that moved from Napster, which was not robust, to BitTorrent, which can't be shut down by authorities. And the rule of software right now is to never centralize again. And much as you kind of consider the hunters of old as being really proud because they shot this big mass of centralized biology, which was an elephant, right? Which is now kind of so pathetic and sad that if you see someone who's hunted an elephant, you actually feel bad for the elephant, and you feel how antiquated these hunters are, that they could be proud that they shot an elephant. It is so easy to find an elephant. You can do it with your infrared camera. You can find them with helicopters from the sky. If you really want to impress people as a hunter in sort of this new idea of decentralization, you might have to go around hunting mosquitoes or bacteria or viruses, things that take the same amount of biology and spread it out and copy it like crazy everywhere. Very similar thing that has happened in biology is now happening to software. And so we get back to our story. Satoshi, who's working in 2008, who's read about the success of BitTorrent and the death of Napster, he was determined to apply this idea of BitTorrent to banks. He wanted to find out what was the centralized part of banks. But what was it? Money's not the centralized part. That's spread out like mosquitoes everywhere. It's copied and moved all over the place. He decided that if he could find that centralized part of the bank, he might be able to create a digital currency. And in a moment of genius, he decided to start to look at the ledger. And it's pretty interesting. If you walk into almost any big bank with a gun and you say, clean out your vaults, or let me access your ledger, they'll probably be more likely to let you clean out their vaults, because the ledger is where banks control money. So especially if they're a big federal bank, the ability to access that ledger and add zeros or erase accounts is much, much more dangerous than stealing everything in the vault. And so Satoshi in 2008 decided to focus exclusively on the ledger. And the questions started rolling. Satoshi thought, what if I can turn a bank inside out? Instead of one central party controlling the ledger, because banks control those ledgers with everything they've got, what if every user were recruited to maintain a constantly updated copy? And so the ledger is a thing that he's going to break up into dust and spread it out, just like BitTorrent did with Billie Jean and Jurassic Park. Well, he had some immediate problems. First of all, public ledgers just aren't so great. Here we see a kid who's got some access to the ATM and he's shooting different numbers into the ledger and he's getting a lot of cash out, right? Bank ledgers, turns out, are the ultimate tragedy of the commons. With such a high incentive to game the system, there's always been only one result in history: centralization. And if you're American, that's the Federal Reserve. But as we spoke about earlier, centralized leads to major mistrust and it leads to anger. But Satoshi was old enough and experienced enough to recall that he had some technology at his disposal. And so, to create his decentralized ledgers, Satoshi paired two main technologies. One's called the proof of work, and one's called elliptic curve digital signatures. The interesting thing about this is none of these technologies were brand new. So nothing that he used was more recent than 2001. And these two technologies combined solved the two problems of digital. One was the double spending problem, and the other was unique access to the ledger, actually having unique ability to do something digitally. And so what's really beautiful about this is Satoshi had taken the real weaknesses of digital, this copying problem, and he turned it into a massive strength by focusing exclusively on the ledger. The strength of digital was perfect copies. Okay, he said, so copy the ledger everywhere, instantly. In turn, he made the uniqueness the flaw. Any ledgers with even one comma not agreeing with the masses would be discarded, leaving fraudsters powerless. He had made Bitcoin by not fighting the problems of digital, by accepting the fact that digital is great at copying, and if you can copy the ledger perfectly and everywhere, people cannot fraud the system. Any individual fraudster with a different ledger, basically giving themselves extra money, will get immediately noticed and tossed out of the system. And so what's really ironic about this is that Satoshi's masterstroke, his real moment of genius, was to eliminate cash to make his currency. There is no cash in Bitcoin. It is only access to specific ledger units. And so the decentralized consensus of millions is replacing the centralized decision of a few by reinventing how currencies can be built. And what's really, really powerful about this is that the blockchain becomes a new form of public good. We're used to the idea of public goods either being sponsored by the government, like national parks, or sponsored by a private company, which makes parks or amphitheaters or whatever. But we don't have anything which is protected and controlled by absolutely nothing at all, just code running in computers everywhere. And if you shut down 10,000 computers, it doesn't matter. The system keeps humming along. So we end up with something that is truly unique. It is not state or government. It is not private or individual. It is an other, a truly public system. Okay, so if you're driving up the public road and if you're driving up the private road, well, out here we've got Bitcoin. Well, with Bitcoin, for the first time in history, you'll be driving up this new thing that we don't even have a name for it. Perhaps all we can say right now is it's a blockchain. And this blockchain, this ability to control value with no third party, no banks, no government, nothing but consensus overseeing Bitcoin. And this leads to what people have referred to as fuel, because Bitcoin is value that can be moved around. It can use to inspire new technologies for permissionless innovation. You don't need to ask to use the blockchain. It sits there, it waits for you, you can use it or not use it. You play by the rules of the code and everything will go smoothly. You don't play by the rules of code and you won't be able to access it at all. And there's no fees for employing the technology. This code is open source. You can copy it, you can make your own, and people have made their own coins left, right, and center. Bitcoin does put in a fee structure to prevent people from spamming the system, sending millions of ridiculously small transactions to shut down the network. So it does have a fee structure there, but there's no oversight on the transaction. So anyone can send value to anyone without any party in the middle. And we won't get into all of this in this video, but this permissionless innovation can lead to things like creating code that makes contracts, mesh networks, notaries, voting, government, and myriad other things, which we'll be talking about in all our videos. Okay, if you stopped right here, you should have a pretty good idea now about what this decentralized ledger is all about and how the constraints of digital force Satoshi to decentralize the ledger and eliminate money entirely. But in order to get a better idea of Bitcoin, we've got a few more slides left and we're going to kind of walk through those and talk about some of these special ideas of Bitcoin. And so I'm just going to jump through the rest of these slides, just letting you know some of the advantages and power of this. Because the ledger is everywhere, everyone sees every transaction, you end up with the option for the first time in all of history to create a product or a company that works with full transparency, which will be great for charities, great for many companies, and even possibly great for eliminating corruption in governments. Now, a lot of people get upset also because gangsters or mobsters or money launderers have been using Bitcoin. Well, it turns out that that's actually a good measure of a currency, because if a currency is actually deciding who can send what to whom, then it has some sort of morality base. Anyone on earth can give US dollars to anyone else on earth without anyone else interfering. US dollars and Bitcoin are very similar. If I couldn't give it to certain people, well, then there's a control issue and that type of currency won't work. So the best currencies on earth, US dollars, euros, yen, yuan, whatever, diamonds and gold can be given to anyone and anyone can use it. And so gangsters use all of those. But keep in mind that Bitcoin is not a very strong currency right now. A strong currency is one that's accepted by more people. So the strongest currency on earth right now is the US dollar, followed pretty close by the euro. A lot of strong currencies out there. But if you're trying to use Bitcoin in your daily transactions, you'll find that it's not very strong. A lot of people are not accepting it. But it's a baby, right? It's only 5 years old. And really, as a currency, it's about 4 or 3 years old because almost no one in those first 2 years was doing any sort of transactions at all. And it's got some issues. It's still being developed. It's software, remember, so it's easy to steal. It's got a volatility issue that is a real problem for many applications. And, well, it could be hacked and it could disappear tomorrow. It's just a real possibility. But if it does get hacked and if something does happen, it's likely that software programmers are going to notice the problem and try to fix this idea. This idea has been invented. It's not going away anytime soon. Now, there's probably a number of people who watch this video and don't get Bitcoin yet. It takes a while. But this video is my best attempt at getting you to understand a little bit about the idea of not using money and giving everyone a copy of the ledger, replacing money with ledgers. But as Satoshi said, if you don't believe me or you don't get it, I don't have time to try and convince you. Sorry. That's Satoshi in 2010, about a year and a couple months after he launched Bitcoin. And so, one of the coolest things about Bitcoin is it's really helping us understand what is money. And we have to start thinking about this real dramatic possibility that perhaps cash, like gold or dollars, has always just been a placeholder in history until we could finally decentralize the ledger, give the ledger to everyone, really eliminate this massive tragedy of commons. So all these questions that we start to hear about money, does it need to have intrinsic value? Is having actual mass being made of molecules a positive or a negative for a currency? We're not sure. But it's really clear that Bitcoin is asking those questions in a provocative way, is making us rethink and possibly finally understand this whole concept of money. Okay, so that's it. I hope that this parable really does help you begin to understand Bitcoin. It is a very, very important technology, and it really needs to be considered as simply that, as a brand new type of technology for dealing with value, wealth, limitations, all without any third party at all. No government, no private institution. We've never seen anything like that before. Okay, so please remember to comment, like, subscribe, do whatever it is you do, and we'll catch you at the next video.